actually started researching this case based on a recommendation from one of you guys, and I have never heard of this case before, which I find so weird, but it seems to be a common thing. Maybe I don't know as much as I thought I did about true crime before I started doing this. It's a long one, and when we get to the end, I will tell you some things that I actually discovered, which is why I am doing this post first instead of the one that I had originally planned. I am also kind of wheezy today. I don't know why that is. I do not have asthma. I don't have a cold, but I can hear it in my voice. I actually think I have tonsil stones, but I've never had them before, so I don't know if that's what it is, but anyway. So today we are actually going to talk about Dennis Rader, or the BTK killer. It's a long one. Settle in, grab a snack, get a drink. I'll give you a second. I'm gonna get one too. And then we will get started on this case. Put me on pause. Go ahead. It's okay. I'm ready. I'm sorry if that was loud. Okay. Alright. Let go. Dennis Rader was born in a quiet corner of Kansas, close to where Kansas, Oklahoma, and Missouri all meet, which actually really kind of scares me because I dated a guy, the crazy guy that I've talked about on my channel several times before, and he lived right in this area, and I was in this area around the time that this guy was arrested. Anyway, it doesn't matter. Okay. On March 9th, 1945, he was the first of 4 sons born to William and Dorothea Rader. He was baptized at the Zion Lutheran Church in Pittsburgh, Kansas. His father was a member of the Marine Corps, who later worked for electric utility KG&E starting in 1948. The family moved to the largest city in Kansas, Wichita, when Dennis was just a young boy. The Raiders settled into a modest but pleasant home on North Seneca Street, which remained their household until it was sold in 2005. As a child, Dennis appeared outwardly normal and unremarkable. He joined the Boy Scouts as a youth and participated in a church group and with their youth activities. Church group youth activities. Yeah, that's what I was trying to say. I shorthand my notes. So he attended Riverview Elementary School, where he was an average to mediocre student with some withdrawn tendencies. By his own account, he says that this is when he developed fantasies about bondage and control and torture at an early age, still in grade school. As he became older and became sexual, he started to dream of tying girls up and having his way with them. Apparently, Annette Funicello, I think I'm saying that right, was one of the many stars of his fantasies, one of his targets, I guess. He admitted to having killed cats and dogs by hanging them. He, of course, learned that he had to keep his developing inner world of bondage, torture, and death a secret from everyone, and apparently did a really good job of doing so. People that knew him personally describe a quiet, polite young man who really preferred to keep to himself. The young Dennis showed no interest in the music of the times, which Elvis, I don't know how you could, anyway. One friend described him as utterly lacking a sense of humor, but tending to be very studious and focused. He was described as a person who chose his words carefully before speaking, but would also give you his full attention as he spoke to you. But, as he did for his entire life, he was the sort of person who appeared outwardly unremarkable and would blend into the background. He would graduate high school with mediocre grades, a C student roughly. In 1963, after a one-year lapse in enrollment, he attended was also the first time that he was able to successfully break and enter into homes and buildings, and he would of course swipe small items of interest and tokens. He found this activity exhilarating. In 1966, at 21 years of age, he dropped out of college and enlisted in the Air Force, which I've heard, and I don't know if this is true, and don't quote me on this, that the Air Force is one of the harder branches to get into, so even though he was a mediocre student, he must have been pretty smart to pass the test. He was apparently trying to avoid being drafted into the Vietnam War, which, if you're in the Air Force, you're gonna go to, I don't know. He's a serial killer. I don't know how his thinking works. He was first sent to Lockland Air Force Base in San Antonio, Texas, for basic training. He spent time at Shepherd Air Force Base in Wichita Falls, Texas, while doing technical training there. In early 1967, he was stationed at Brookley Air Force Base in Mobile, Alabama, and it appears like he was there until January of 1968, where then he was sent to Kadena Air Force Base in Okinawa. Now, keep in mind, they typically travel a lot, Air Force personnel, like I've said before, and same crazy guy. He was active duty for 7 years, so he did travel the 7 years that I knew of him, he was active duty, and he traveled a lot. He was in for way longer than that, doesn't matter. Anyway, back to Dennis. Sorry, I got sidetracked. It's like a squirrel. After 4 years of service, he decided not to re-up and was discharged. He returned to Wichita, where he then served 2 more years as a reservist. His 4 years of active duty in the Air Force appear to have been outwardly unremarkable. This has stated a lot about Dennis. I don't know if people just couldn't come up with better terms, but I try not to change their terms. He attained the rank of sergeant and worked in the installation of antenna equipment department, among other tasks. By his own description, it was during this period he started to have sexual relations using local prostitutes. His attempts to engage in bondage activities were rejected, and he was able to continue his trolling activities from time to time. But his journals make no mention of any incidents where a victim was more than stalked. He describes one incident where he successfully broke into the base library and pilfered a book. I love that word, pilfered. As always, he was not caught. One former buddy from those times was completely shocked when he found out that Dennis was BTK in 2005. Dennis was just one of the good guys, he said, just sort of blended in. Dennis received the Air Force Good Conduct Medal, the Small Arms Expert Marksmanship Ribbon, and the National Defense Service Medal before he was discharged from active duty in the summer of 1970. Less than 1 year after his return to Wichita, on May 22nd, 1971, Dennis married Paula Dietz. Paula was also from the same area, and they had actually attended the same high school. She was a fellow Lutheran. He was 26 and she was 23 when they got married. They settled in Park City, not far from the Rader home in North Wichita. Dennis was working in the meat department of an IGA supermarket, and Paula was a bookkeeper. In 1972, he went to work at the Coleman Company, a manufacturer of camping supplies, and Wichita's largest employer at the time. He worked there for 13 months until July of 1973. Dennis then found employment with a small aircraft manufacturer. He was also attending Butler County Community College in El Dorado, and he earned an associate's degree in electronics in 1973, so he was a busy guy. The fall of 1973, Dennis starts his studies at Wichita State University. It would take him 6 years of night school to earn his degree. He was a poor student, even by his own description, a chronic C- or D level. He couldn't spell very well and may have had a learning disability reflected in his unusually bad written grammar, which we'll talk about later. which what kind of brother-in-law does that? But Dennis directed everyone to lie down in the living room and then changed his mind and herded them all into a bedroom. The Otero family allowed Dennis to bind them as they believed that all that he wanted was their money, food, and vehicle. But they quickly learned they were mistaken. Everything changed when Dennis put a bag over Joe's head. Joe fought very hard. He tore holes in the bag, and Rader had to come up with a different plan. He devised a cord ligature to subdue and kill Joe. He then moved on to Julie, age 34. He tried to strangle her with his bare hands. She begged him not to kill her children and told him, "May God have mercy on your soul." It took several attempts before he was successful in murdering her. 9-year-old Joey Otero was next. He was found face down on his bedroom floor with a bag over his head. And Dennis had apparently brought a chair into the bedroom to She entered her apartment to find him inside. She didn't resist when ordered to disrobe and allowed him to bind her to her bed. After she was tied up, Dennis explained to her that he was the man who had committed the recent murders, and he announced that she was his next victim. Semen was left on a nightgown next to the body. The next morning, Dennis phoned the police, stating, "Yes, you will find a homicide at 843 South Pershing. Nancy Fox." That is correct. Dennis then walked away from the phone, leaving the receiver dangling. Although the 911 tape was played repeatedly on the news, no one recognized Dennis's voice. Early the next year, Dennis sent a sarcastic poem on a postcard to the Wichita Eagle newspaper entitled "Shirley Locks." But no one realized the connection until days later, when it was followed by a much more serious letter. The writer was apparently angered that his previous work had not been shown. He sent a letter claiming responsibility for the murders of the Otero family, Shirley Vane, and Nancy Fox. Wichita police publicly released the information, announcing that there was a serial killer in their quiet little town. Citizens were advised to be diligent in checking doors and windows. A whole generation of women grew up in Wichita that routinely checked their phones for a dial tone whenever re-entering their homes to make sure the phone line had not been cut by an intruder. We don't have home phones now, but that still scares me. In June of 1978, Paula gave birth to Dennis's second and final child, Carrie. She had been pregnant through all of the events during and following Nancy Fox's murder. His next victim is Anna Williams. She was a recently widowed 63-year-old woman. He broke into her home in April of 1979. While waiting for her to come home, he rummaged through her belongings and took a small few items. But he left before she came home, so I guess she really wasn't a victim. She was kind of a target. 2 months after the break-in, she received a package with a poem titled, "Oh, Anna, why didn't you appear?" I actually have it here to read to you, but it doesn't really make sense. You can Google it if you're super interested in it, but I don't know, it's just really a bunch of gibberish to me, so anyway. A similar package arrived at the doorstep of a local TV station. Terrified that the serial killer had her in his sights, Anna quickly moved out of the area and far away from Kansas, which is exactly what I would have done, even with that letter being as weird as it was. So, he sent a letter sometime around 1978-79, and this one I thought was interesting, so I thought I would read it to you. And I'm gonna just read it exactly as he wrote it. Quote, "I find the newspaper not writing enough about the poem on Vane unamusing. A little paragraph would have been enough. I know it not the media fault. The police chief, he keep things quiet and doesn't let the public know they're a psycho running around loose, strangling mostly women. There's 7 in the ground. Who will be next? How many do I have to kill before I get a name in the paper or some national attention? Do the cops think all those deaths are not related? Golly gee, yes, the MO is different in each, but look, a pattern is developing. Victims are tied up, most have been women. Phone cut. Bring some bondage, matter sadist tendencies. No struggle. Outside the death spot, no witness, except Vane's kids. They were lucky a phone call saved them. I was going to tape the boys and put plastic over their head like I did Joseph and Shirley, and then hang the girl. God, oh God, what a beautiful sexual relief that would have been. Josephine, when I hung her, really turned me on. Her pleading for mercy, then the rope took hold. She helpless, staring at me with wide terror-filled eyes, the rope getting tighter it all over. Since I about blew it on the phone, handwriting is out. Letter guide is too long and typewriter can be traced too. My short poem of death and maybe a drawing. Later on, a real picture and maybe a tape of the sound will come your way. How will you know me? Before a murder or murders, you will receive a copy of the initials BTK. You keep that copy, the original will show up someday on Guess Who. May you not be the unluck one. P.S. How about some name for me? It's time. 7 down and many more to go. I like the following. How about you? The BTK Strangler, Wichita Strangler, Poetic Strangler, the Bond Age Strangler, or Psycho, the Wichita Hangman, the Wichita Executioner, the Garrote Phantom, the Asphyxiator. And he signed it BTK. This guy's ego is really what got him caught, but we'll get there. Dennis Rader dropped off the radar for the next 15 years. Life got in the way, or perhaps he felt like police were getting too close to catch him. The only contact to the police was a letter in 1988, but it was never verified to be from the BTK killer. But just because he stayed out of the public eye doesn't mean he stopped killing people. In April of 1985, Dennis, now 40 years old, was a busy family man with a full-time job, positioned as a scout leader of his son's Boy Scout troop, and very active in the church. Despite all of this, by his own admission, he had never stopped trolling for victims. Once, while attending Boy Scout camp with his son, he left camp in the evening, stating that he had a headache. But he chose to visit Marnie Hedge, a 53-year-old neighbor who had lost her husband about a year prior. A neighbor, him and his wife waved to her as they went on walks in the evening. He stopped for a beer and apparently purposely spilled it on his shirt so he would appear drunk. He left his car at the bowling alley and took a cab to Park City to the home of Marnie Hedge, not Ledge. Dennis severed the phone line and entered the house, but found no one at home. He decided to hide in the bedroom closet, and he watched as Marnie and a male friend entered the home several hours later. He waited patiently until the male friend left at 1 o'clock in the morning. When Marnie turned out the light and went to bed, he crept out of the closet and turned on the bathroom light. Without hesitation, he jumped onto the woman and strangled her in her bed. Out of her closet. This is why my sister shuts the closet door all the time. Closet monsters. He then proceeded to drag her body with her bedding to her car and place her in the trunk. He took the body to the church that he attended, which he had keys to, and dragged her into the basement of the church. He proceeded to tape plastic bags over the windows and then posed her body in various positions while he took photographs of her. When he finished, he took her body and dumped it in a shallow grave outside Park City. He then returned to her vehicle, wiped down the car for prints before taking it back to camp. Here's what I don't understand. Why did he take her to the church where he worked? Why not just take those pictures in her house? This is the first person that he's dumped somewhere. Why didn't he leave her at her house? And he took her car, and then left it and wiped it down for prints, and then got back in his car and went back to camp. I don't know what was so different about her, but spotlights fell on Dolores Davis. Dolores was 62, single, and lived alone only a half a mile from Dennis's home. Dennis planned for his attack to happen during his next Boy Scout camp. Again, making an excuse to leave, he headed back to his neighborhood. He used a cement block to smash his way through the sliding glass door at the back of the house, and he found Miss Dolores reading in her bed. He fed her a line about being a vagrant in need of money, tied her up, and strangled her to death. After this, he made a sketch documenting the end of her life, then dragged her outside and put her in the trunk of her car. He drove the car to a lake near the interstate and left the body and other evidence under some trees. I wish you could see her right now. She just climbed in Sean's gaming chair and it fell backwards, and she looked at me like she was so freaking offended. I'm sorry, she is being so weird today. Anyway, he actually later then returned to the scene of the crime to wipe down any fingerprints that he may have left, retrieved his own vehicle, and went back to pick up the body. He relocated her to a remote area under a bridge in northern Sedgwick County. The following night, he left camp again to pose and photograph Miss Dolores' body. He also took a Polaroid of himself wearing this super creepy mask that reminded me of the movie The Strangers. Ugh. In the hole that he dug for Dolores. Dennis would later state that he had an encounter with a police officer that evening at the place where he went to change his clothes, but he was let go after a few questions. That cop failed in his job. 4 months after the death of Dolores, Dennis was hired on as Park City's animal control officer and code enforcer. He'd been fired from ADT security for not getting his work done. Can you imagine that? He used this position to harass and gain information about local residents. He issued petty citations for trivial things like grass being over 6 inches in height, having the wrong color garden hose, etc. Several residents moved out of the area due to his mistreatment, but he was never disciplined for any of the incidents. He also received complaints from female coworkers about his degrading and demanding behavior towards women. A lawsuit was filed in federal court stating that his ongoing disruptive and disturbing behavior as well as more misleading information about the killer. He made comments about living in a 3-story apartment building and said that he had the elevator rigged with explosives should the police try to capture him. Dennis continued communicating with the police by using cereal boxes, dolls, and nonsensical letters. Drop number 11 arrived at KSAS TV on February 16th, contained a letter, a piece of jewelry, and a floppy disk. On the disk, detectives found software from Christ Lutheran Church and the name Dennis. A quick search on the software on the internet showed Dennis Rader as the president of the church council. The police quickly started surveillance on Dennis, and a DNA sample was taken from his daughter's medical records. Detectives were able to get a familial match to the BTK crime scenes. On February 25th, 2005, Dennis left his office to head home for lunch. Immediately after he got home, law enforcement officials, including a Wichita Police Bomb Unit, 2 SWAT trucks, the KBI, FBI, and ATF agents, converged on his residence near the intersection of I-35 and 61st Street North. Once they had him in handcuffs, he was asked by an officer, "Mr. Rader, do you know why you're going downtown?" To which he replied, "Oh, I have my suspicions. Why?" Police searched Dennis's home and vehicle and collected evidence to include computer equipment, black pantyhose, and a cylindrical container. Cylindrical. Big words in me, you guys know. The church he attended, his office at City Hall, and the main branch of the Park City Library were also searched that day. Officers were seen removing a computer from his City Hall office, but it is unclear if any evidence was found at these locations. As soon as Dennis was confronted about the computer disk with his name on it, and the DNA matched to multiple crime scenes, he proceeded to take detectives on a grueling 30-hour confession. He stated that he chose to resurface in 2004 for various reasons, to include the feature story on the case and the release of the book called A Nightmare in Wichita by Robert obsession with self-bondage. Detectives found a number of photos that he had taken of himself tied up in all sorts of ways. He was also fond of dressing up in items that he stole from his victims, and he would use a Polaroid camera and a tripping mechanism to take many photos of himself in these ways. News about Dennis since his assignment to the maximum security El Dorado Correctional Facility has been scant. He appears to have settled into the routine of prison, but is kept well away from Gen Pop for his own safety. His prison record shows only one minor infraction of the rules since his arrival, which would be considered an overall good behavior record. His family, relatives, and ex-wife all intentionally stayed away from any media exposure and never granted interviews until his daughter, Carrie, spoke in 2014. She actually spoke out regarding a movie based on the story by Stephen King called A Good Marriage, which I've never seen but might have to, concerning a husband who was a secret serial killer until his wife finds out. Stephen King publicly stated the idea was inspired by the BTK killer and the relationship he had with his unknowing wife who never suspected him. Carrie said the publicity was wrong and hurtful, and no such stated link or comparison should have been publicly made by Stephen King. She also revealed that despite the trauma of finding out that she was the BTK's daughter in 2005, she and her husband have gone on to lead productive lives and now have children of their own. She has never visited Dennis since he was arrested and has only sent the occasional letter since then. She has actually gotten letters from him and says that he's starting to lose his memory and get some dementia. You can see it in his letters, she says. He's really worried about what's going to happen to his body when he dies. He'll write things like, "If you don't write or communicate with me more, I'm going to give someone else my dead body." She states that really all he has left to hold over anybody anymore is his remains. So, the reason that I am posting this today is currently People Magazine has run an article with an interview about from Carrie Rosen. Is that what I said? I just closed all my notes. From his daughter Carrie. And they are also doing a 2020 interview with her that will air Friday, February 1st, 9 p.m. Eastern Time on ABC. She has also written a book, and it will come out January 29th of this year, so in just a couple of days, in just 3 days. I found it on Amazon. You can actually pre-order it if you're really interested in it. Let me pull this back up so I can spell it for you so that you can search for it. Rawson, Rawson. First name Carrie, Kerri. I didn't look at the price. Sorry, I can't give you. I just saw that it wasn't. I wanted to check the date that it was going to be released. So actually, it was just kind of a coincidence that one of you guys recommended this, and then I found out that the February 4th issue of